As King Leko fights to maintain peace in his kingdom, he faces a bitter betrayal. As King Leko fights to maintain peace in his kingdom, he faces a bitter betrayal from Mosi, a former ally seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Queen Zana, once torn between two men, must navigate her own path as old As King Leko fights to maintain peace in his kingdom, he faces a bitter betrayal from Mosi, a former ally seeking revenge. Meanwhile, Queen Zana, once torn between two men, must navigate her own path as old wounds resurface and threaten to tear their love apart. When war looms on the horizon, Leko and Zana are forced to make impossible choices, risking everything for the survival of their kingdom and their love. With enemies both inside and outside the palace walls, the true test of their reign is about to begin. Can love and loyalty withstand the shadows of betrayal? The story, Leko sat in the grand halls of Ajura, looking out over the vast lands that would soon be his. His father, the king, was preparing to step down, and the elders had already begun plans for his coronation. But there was a pressing matter. Tradition held that a king could not rule alone. He needed a queen. Without a wife, Leko could not wear the crown. The pressure weighed heavily on him. The elders had suggested many women from his kingdom, daughters of noblemen, each beautiful and kind, but Leko wasn't moved by any of them. He didn't want to marry out of duty. He wanted to marry for love. He wanted to find someone who made his heart race. It was during one of these moments of frustration that Leko heard of the neighboring kingdom of Lunda. It was said that Lunda was a peaceful, prosperous land, with wise leaders and people known for their kindness. The idea of visiting a new place sparked something in Leko's heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could find what he was looking for in Lunda. The elders encouraged him to go. It would be good for the people of Ajura to see their future king forging alliances with other kingdoms. So, Leko prepared to embark on a journey to Lunda. But deep in his heart, he knew he wasn't just going to strengthen alliances. He was going with the hope of finding someone who could be his queen. Leko's carriage rode through the rolling hills and vast plains, his heart light with hope. He didn't know what awaited him in Lunda, but he was ready for whatever the future held. The kingdom of Lunda was everything Leko had heard it would be. The people were warm and welcoming. The streets were lined with colorful markets, and the palace was grand, yet humble. The king of Lunda, an older man named Kobe, greeted Leko with open arms. They sat for long hours discussing the future of their kingdoms, the importance of peace, and the bond between their lands. But even as they talked, Leko's mind wandered. He was restless, eager to explore the kingdom, eager to meet the people. And though he wouldn't admit it aloud, he was eager to see if Lunda held the woman of his dreams. It was during a grand feast that Leko first saw her. Zana. She sat at the far end of the long table, laughing softly with her friends. Her skin glowed like the sun, and her smile was gentle, yet bright enough to light the darkest night. Leko's heart skipped a beat the moment their eyes met. She was stunning, unlike anyone he had ever seen before. Throughout the night, Leko's eyes kept drifting toward her. He could barely focus on the conversations around him. All he could see was Zana. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he asked one of the servants who she was. The answer came like a blow to his chest. "Her name is Zana," the servant whispered. "She is married to Jallo, a warrior in our kingdom." Leko's heart sank. Married. Of course, she was married. How could someone like her not be? Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that had taken hold of him. He had never felt this way about anyone before. But she was someone else's wife. Days passed, and Leko tried to push thoughts of Zana away. He threw himself into meetings trying to distract himself with discussions about trade and politics. But every time he saw her, his heart would race again. He knew it was wrong, but he couldn't help it. There was something about her that drew him in, something he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, Leko decided to explore the village. He wanted to see more of Lunda, to understand the people better. As he walked through the village, he heard soft singing coming from the direction of the stream. Curious, he followed the sound, and there, sitting on a rock by the water, was Zana. She was alone. Her feet dipped in the cool water, humming a tune he didn't recognize. She looked peaceful, as though the worries of the world didn't touch her here. Leko hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should approach her, but something inside him urged him forward. "Mind if I join you?" Leko asked, his voice soft. Zana looked up, startled, but then smiled. "Of course, Prince Leko," she said, her voice as kind as her smile. They sat together by the stream, talking about everything and nothing. Leko found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone else. She was easy to talk to, and her laughter was like music to his ears. But every time she smiled, he was reminded that she wasn't his to love. Still, Leko couldn't stay away. He sought out reasons to see her, to talk to her, and slowly over time, he realized that he had fallen in love with her. But Zana was married, and he was a prince who needed a wife before his coronation. It seemed that fate had played a cruel joke on him. One night, unable to sleep, Leko found himself wandering the palace halls. His heart was heavy with the weight of his feelings for Zana. He knew it was wrong to love her, but he couldn't stop himself. He found his way to the gardens, where the moonlight bathed the flowers in a soft glow. As he stood there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see Zana approaching. "You shouldn't be out here alone, Your Highness," she said softly, though there was a teasing smile on her lips. "I could say the same for you," Leko replied, trying to match her light tone, though his heart was pounding in his chest. For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them thick. Leko wanted to tell her how he felt, but he was afraid. What if she rejected him? What if she told Jallo? But the words tumbled out before he could stop them. "Zana," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I think I've fallen in love with you." Zana's smile faded, and for a moment, she looked as though she didn't know what to say. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Leko, I care for you too, but I'm married to Jallo. There's nothing we can do about it." Leko's heart ached. He had known this would be her answer, but hearing it hurt more than he had expected. Still, he couldn't give up. He couldn't let her slip away. Leko knew what he had to do, but it wouldn't be easy. He had to speak to the king of Lunda to tell him how he felt about Zana. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way for them to be together. He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try. The next morning, Leko requested an audience with King Kobe. His heart raced as he waited outside the throne room. When the doors finally opened, Leko stepped inside, his hands shaking. "Your Majesty," Leko began, bowing low, "I have something personal I wish to discuss with you." King Kobe raised an eyebrow but gestured for him to continue. Leko took a deep breath. "I have fallen in love with Zana, the wife of Jallo. I know she is married, but I cannot ignore my feelings. I have come to ask if there is any way at all that she could be freed from her marriage." The king's expression darkened. He stood slowly, his eyes never leaving Leko's face. "Prince Leko, I understand that love can be complicated, but in this kingdom, a marriage is sacred. Zana is married to Jallo, and that bond cannot be broken." Leko's heart sank. He had expected this answer, but hearing it still hurt. For the next several days, Leko stayed away from Zana. He needed time to think, to come to terms with the fact that he couldn't have her. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. He knew he had to do something, anything, to change their fate. Finally, Leko made a decision. If he couldn't convince the king to let Zana go, perhaps he could convince Jallo. It was risky and it could cause tension between their kingdoms. But Leko was willing to take that risk for the woman he loved. He found Jallo training in the courtyard, his sword slicing through the air with precision. Leko approached cautiously, his heart pounding. "Jallo," Leko called out, "I need to speak with you." Jallo stopped, wiping sweat from his brow, and turned to face the prince. "What is it, Your Highness?" he asked, his tone respectful but wary. Leko hesitated for a moment, then spoke. I have fallen in love with Zana. I know she is your wife, but I cannot stop how I feel. I wish to ask for her hand in marriage. Jallo's face hardened. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. You wish to take my wife? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Leko held his ground. Only if she chooses to be with me, he said. I am asking you to let her go, to give her the freedom to choose her own path. For a moment, Jallo said nothing. Then he stepped even closer, his voice a growl. You speak of love, but what about honor? What about the vows Zana and I made to each other? Before Leko could respond, a voice called out from behind them. It was Zana. I never wanted this, Zana whispered, stepping forward. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Both men turned to face her, their expressions tense. Zana looked torn, her eyes filled with conflict. I love you both, she said softly, but my heart cannot be divided. I don't know what to do. Leko's heart twisted in his chest. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He had hoped that Zana would choose him, that they could be together. But now, everything felt impossible. Before anyone could say anything else, a loud horn blared from the palace gates. The three of them turned to see a messenger running toward them, his face pale with fear. War is coming, the messenger shouted, his voice trembling. An army approaches from the north. In an instant, the tension between Leko, Zana, and Jallo was forgotten. There were bigger problems to deal with now. Leko's mind raced. War? Who would dare attack the peaceful kingdom of Lunda? And why now? The palace erupted into chaos as the news of the approaching army spread. Soldiers rushed to their posts, and the king called for an emergency meeting of his generals. Leko found himself swept up in the preparations, his heart heavy with both the threat of war and his unresolved feelings for Zana. He had come to Lunda to find peace, to find love, but now it seemed that everything was falling apart. The kingdom was on the brink of war, and the woman he loved was married to another man. As the soldiers prepared for battle, Leko tried to focus on the task at hand. He was a prince, after all, and it was his duty to help protect the kingdom, even if it wasn't his own. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Zana. The days passed in a blur as the army of Lunda prepared for the impending attack. Leko fought alongside Jallo, their shared duty momentarily overshadowing the tension between them. They defended the kingdom together, each strike of their swords carrying the weight of their unspoken conflict. But even as the war raged, Leko couldn't stop thinking about Zana. Would she choose him? Would she be safe in the midst of all this chaos? He couldn't bear the thought of losing her, either to the war or to Jallo. The final battle loomed, the fate of Lunda hanging in the balance. The battle raged on for days. Leko fought side by side with the warriors of Lunda, his mind torn between the fierce clashes of swords and his unresolved feelings for Zana. The enemy was strong, but Lunda's warriors were determined. Jallo, the warrior prince, was a force on the battlefield, his sword swift and deadly. Leko couldn't help but admire his strength and courage, even as his heart burned with jealousy over Zana. As the final battle drew near, the people of Lunda prayed for victory. The soldiers were weary, but they knew they had to fight for their kingdom, their families, and their homes. Leko knew that he had to give everything he had to protect the kingdom, even though it wasn't his own. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky and the campfires flickered, Leko sat alone, sharpening his sword. His thoughts drifted once more to Zana. He had seen her only briefly during the past days, always from a distance. She had been helping the women and children find shelter, doing her part for the kingdom. Leko couldn't stop thinking about the moment they had shared in the garden, the way her eyes had looked into his, filled with longing and sadness. He knew that she cared for him, but her duty to Jallo weighed heavily on her heart. Leko was torn between his love for Zana and the honor that came with respecting her marriage. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that life was too short, and he couldn't let her slip away without a fight. The next morning, the sky was dark with storm clouds, and the wind howled through the valley. The final battle was upon them. Leko stood at the front lines, his sword ready, his heart pounding. He looked around at the men beside him. Jallo was there, his face set with determination, his eyes sharp as he prepared for the fight ahead. Despite their personal conflict, they were united in their desire to protect Lunda. The enemy forces approached, their war cries echoing through the hills. Leko gripped his sword tightly, his mind clearing of everything except the battle. The clash of steel against steel filled the air as the two armies collided. Leko fought with everything he had, his movements swift and precise. His muscles burned, but he didn't stop. Amidst the chaos, Leko found himself face to face with one of the enemy's fiercest warriors. The man was tall and strong, his eyes wild with fury. They battled fiercely, their swords clashing in a flurry of strikes. Leko could feel the weight of the fight pressing down on him, but he refused to give up. He thought of Zana, her face flashing in his mind, and it gave him the strength to push forward. With one final strike, Leko knocked the warrior's sword from his hand and plunged his blade into the man's chest. The warrior fell to the ground, his eyes wide with shock as the life drained from him. Leko stood over him, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. But there was no time to rest. The battle continued to rage around him. Leko fought his way through the enemy lines, his mind focused on one thing: victory. He couldn't let the kingdom fall, not after everything they had fought for. As the battle neared its end, Leko found Jallo fighting off 3 enemy soldiers at once. He was a skilled warrior, but even he was struggling against the overwhelming odds. Without hesitation, Leko rushed to his side, cutting down one of the soldiers with a swift strike. Jallo glanced at Leko, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but he said nothing. Together, they fought off the remaining soldiers, their movements in perfect sync. For a brief moment, their rivalry was forgotten, replaced by the shared need to protect the kingdom. Finally, after what felt like hours, the enemy forces began to retreat. The warriors of Lunda had won. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, and the air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat. Leko stood in the midst of it all, his body aching, but his heart filled with relief. They had done it. They had protected the kingdom. But as the dust settled and the survivors tended to their wounded, Leko's thoughts returned to Zana. The battle may have been won, but the war in his heart was far from over. After the battle, the kingdom of Lunda celebrated their victory. The people rejoiced, but Leko found little joy in the celebration. His heart was heavy with the unresolved feelings he carried for Zana. In the days following the battle, Leko found himself avoiding Zana. He knew he couldn't stay in Lunda much longer. His coronation was fast approaching, and he still had no bride. The elders back in Ajura were growing impatient, and Leko knew he couldn't delay any further. One evening, as the sun began to set, Leko sat by the stream where he had first spoken to Zana. The water flowed gently, and the air was filled with the soft hum of insects. It was peaceful, but Leko's mind was anything but calm. He didn't hear her approach at first, but when he looked up, there she was. Zana stood before him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and longing. "Leko," she said softly, "I've been looking for you." Leko's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what to say. He had been trying so hard to avoid this moment, but now that she was here standing before him, he couldn't escape the truth any longer. "I can't stay," Leko said finally, his voice low. "I have to return to Ajura. My people are waiting for me." Zana nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know," she whispered. "But before you go, I need to tell you something." Leko held his breath, waiting for her to continue. "I've spoken to Jallo," Zana said, her voice trembling. "I told him the truth about us." Leko's heart raced. "What did he say?" Zana looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "He said he would let me go, if that's what I truly wanted." Leko felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. Zana was free to be with him, to leave Jallo and come to Ajura as his queen. But as he looked into her eyes, he realized something. Zana was torn. She cared for him, but she also cared for Jallo. This wasn't just about him or their love, it was about her life, and her future. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Zana said softly. "I don't know what to do." Leko swallowed hard, his heart aching. He wanted to tell her to come with him, to leave everything behind, and start a new life together. But he couldn't. He couldn't ask her to make that choice, not when it would cause her so much pain. "You have to choose what's best for you," Leko said finally, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "Whatever that may be." Zana's tears fell, but she nodded. "I'm sorry, Leko," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Leko stood, his heart breaking as he took one last look at the woman he had fallen in love with. He wanted to hold her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but he knew that he couldn't. Without another word, Leko turned and walked away, leaving Zana standing by the stream. The sound of the water the only thing filling the silence between them. Leko returned to Ajura with a heavy heart. His people greeted him with joy, but he couldn't shake the sadness that clung to him. The coronation was fast approaching, and Leko still had no bride. The elders were growing more concerned, and Leko knew he had to make a decision soon. But no matter how many noble women were presented to him, Leko couldn't forget Zana. She haunted his thoughts, her face appearing in his dreams every night. He had left her behind in Lunda, but his heart had remained with her. One evening, as Leko prepared for his coronation, a messenger arrived from Lunda. The news he brought changed everything. Zana had made her decision. The words echoed in Leko's mind as he read the letter from the messenger. His hands shook slightly, and his heart raced as he tried to focus on the words in front of him. The message was simple, but it carried the weight of everything Leko had hoped for and feared. Zana had left Lunda. She had made her choice, but she wasn't coming to Ajura. The letter explained that Zana had decided to leave both Leko and Jallo behind. She couldn't bear the pain of hurting either man, so she had chosen to go on her own journey. No one knew where she had gone, only that she had left the kingdom quietly without a word to anyone. The letter had come from one of her close friends in Lunda, who had sent it to inform Leko of her decision. Leko's heart sank. He had expected her to choose either him or Jallo, but he hadn't anticipated that she would choose neither. The weight of the news pressed down on him, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. She was gone. Zana, the woman he had fallen in love with, the one he had dreamed of making his queen, had left without a trace. For days, Leko wandered the palace in a daze. His coronation was drawing nearer, but the thought of becoming king without Zana by his side felt empty. The elders noticed his distraction and grew concerned, urging him to focus on the responsibilities ahead. But Leko couldn't shake the feeling of loss, the ache in his heart that only Zana had been able to fill. One evening, as Leko stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom of Ajura, his father, the aging king, approached him. The old king had always been a wise and gentle ruler, and he had watched his son struggle with the burden of love and duty. "My son," the king said softly, placing a hand on Leko's shoulder. "You carry a heavy heart. I can see it in your eyes." Leko didn't speak at first. He stared out at the horizon, where the sun was setting in shades of orange and gold, casting long shadows across the land. "I thought she would come to me," Leko said quietly, his voice filled with sorrow. "I thought Zana would be my queen." The king nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "Love is a powerful thing, my son. It can lift us up, but it can also break us. Zana made her choice, and it is not an easy thing to accept. But you must find a way to heal, for the sake of your people." Leko clenched his fists, struggling to hold back the pain. "How can I heal when the woman I love is gone? How can I rule without her by my side?" The king sighed, his eyes filled with the wisdom of years. "You are more than your love for Zana, Leko. You are a prince, and soon you will be a king. Your people need you to be strong, to lead them with a clear mind and a kind heart. Do not let this sorrow consume you." Leko looked down at his father, the weight of his words sinking in. He knew his father was right. He couldn't let his heartbreak ruin him. Not when so many people were depending on him. But it was easier said than done. For the next few weeks, Leko tried to push his feelings for Zana aside. He threw himself into preparing for the coronation, meeting with the elders and the council to ensure that everything was in order. The kingdom of Ajura was filled with excitement as the day of the coronation approached, and Leko did his best to smile and play his part. But deep inside, the ache remained. On the day of the coronation, the palace was alive with celebration. Banners hung from every balcony, and the streets were filled with people cheering for their new king. Leko stood in front of the grand hall, dressed in royal robes, his heart heavy with both pride and sorrow. He knew this was the moment he had been preparing for his entire life, but it didn't feel like he had imagined it would. As the ceremony began, Leko stood tall, his head held high. The elders spoke of his strength and wisdom, of the great future that awaited him as king. But as they placed the crown on his head, Leko felt a hollow ache inside. He had become king, but he was not the man he had hoped to be. He had wanted Zana by his side, and without her, the throne felt empty. The cheers of the crowd echoed through the hall, but Leko barely heard them. He smiled and waved, playing the part of the new king, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Zana, where she was, what she was doing. Was she safe? Did she think of him? That night, after the celebrations had ended, Leko sat alone in his chambers. The crown felt heavy on his head, and the weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him. But more than anything, he felt the weight of his love for Zana and the pain of her absence. Just as he was about to retire for the night, there was a soft knock on his door. Leko frowned. It was late, and he wasn't expecting anyone. "Come in," he called, his voice tired. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped into the room. Leko's heart stopped. It was Zana. Leko stared at her in disbelief. Zana stood before him, her face pale but determined. She wore a simple cloak, her eyes filled with both sorrow and resolve. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence heavy between them. "You're here?" Leko whispered, his voice barely audible. Zana nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I had to see you." Leko rose to his feet, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a step toward her, but hesitated. Why now? After all this time, why now? Zana looked down, her hands trembling slightly. I thought I could run away, she said softly. I thought leaving would make things easier. But it didn't. I've been lost, Leko. I've been trying to find my way, but all I could think about was you. Leko's heart ached at her words. He had longed for this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to say. I made a mistake, Zana continued, her voice breaking. I thought I could avoid hurting Jallo, avoid hurting you. But I've only made things worse. I know now that I can't run from my feelings, from what my heart wants. Leko took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. And what does your heart want, Zana? She looked up at him, tears in her eyes. You, she whispered. It's always been you. Leko felt a surge of emotion rise within him, a mixture of relief, love, and pain. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I've waited for you, Zana, he said softly. I've waited for this moment, but I need to know, are you sure? Are you ready to leave everything behind? Zana nodded, her tears falling freely now. Yes, she whispered. I'm ready. Leko pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the weight of the past few months seemed to melt away. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leko felt at peace. But as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, a knock came at the door. Leko frowned, pulling away from Zana slightly. Who is it? The door creaked open, and one of Leko's most trusted advisors stepped inside, his face pale. Your Majesty, he said urgently, there is a problem. Jallo, he's here. Leko's heart sank. Leko's grip on Zana tightened as the words sank in. Jallo was here. The man Leko had stood beside in battle, the man who had once been Zana's husband. His mind raced with questions. Why had Jallo come? What did he want? Zana's face turned pale, and she stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. Leko, I didn't know he would come. Leko nodded, his mind already thinking of what needed to be done. Stay here, he said firmly, his voice calm but tense. I'll go speak with him. Zana reached out, her hand trembling. Leko, please be careful. He gave her a reassuring nod before turning and following his advisor out of the room. His heart pounded in his chest as he made his way to the throne room, where Jallo was waiting. This wasn't how Leko had imagined things would go, but he had no choice now. He had to face whatever was coming. When Leko entered the throne room, Jallo was standing in the center, his arms crossed, and his expression unreadable. He was still dressed in his warrior's armor, his face etched with determination. Prince Leko, Jallo said, his voice cold and distant. Or should I say, King Leko? Leko nodded, standing tall despite the tension in the room. Jallo, why are you here? Jallo's eyes narrowed. You know why I'm here? Leko took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. Zana has made her choice. She has come to me of her own free will. Jallo's jaw tightened, but he didn't lash out. Instead, he took a step closer, his voice low and controlled. I know. I've known for a long time that her heart wasn't with me, but that doesn't mean I'll just walk away. Leko frowned. What are you saying? Jallo's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and sorrow. I'm saying that I want something in return for letting her go. I'm not a fool. Leko, I fought beside you in battle. I know what's at stake. Leko's heart raced. What could Jallo possibly want? I want land, Jallo said, his voice firm. Land and a title. If I am to lose Zana, then I will at least gain something in return. Leko stared at him, his mind spinning. This wasn't what he had expected. He had thought Jallo would come in anger, demanding Zana back. But this was something else entirely. Land and a title. Leko repeated slowly, trying to process the request. Jallo nodded. I don't care about love anymore, Leko. I care about power. Give me what I want, and you can have Zana. Leko's heart sank. This wasn't how love was supposed to be won. This wasn't the fairy tale ending he had hoped for. But he also knew that Jallo wasn't going to back down easily. And so, with a heavy heart, Leko made his decision. Leko's mind whirled as he stood before Jallo. He had always believed love was a matter of the heart, not something to be bargained for. But now, Jallo was asking him to trade land and titles for Zana's freedom. It felt wrong. Dirty, even. But Leko knew that refusing Jallo could escalate the situation into something far worse. War between their kingdoms was unthinkable, especially after they had just fought side by side. Leko took a deep breath. Jallo, I understand your position, but let's be clear, Zana's heart is not something that can be bought or traded. If she chooses me, it's because she loves me, not because I've given you land. Jallo's expression hardened. You may have her heart, but I'm still her husband. If you want her to be free to marry you, then you'll give me what I'm asking for. Land, a title, enough to start over, somewhere far from here. Leko's heart ached at the situation, but he knew that Jallo's pride and honor were wounded. And this was his way of making the best out of a painful loss. Leko wasn't just negotiating for Zana's freedom. He was negotiating for peace. He thought of Zana, waiting for him, torn between the two men who had shaped her life. The sooner this was resolved, the better for all of them. Very well, Leko said finally, his voice steady. You will have land in the southern regions of Ajura, and you will be given the title of Lord Jallo. It is a generous offer, but in return, Zana will be free to marry whomever she chooses. Do we have an agreement? Jallo paused, the tension in the room thick enough to cut. He looked at Leko for a long moment, then finally nodded. We have an agreement. Relief washed over Leko, though it was bittersweet. He had just bargained for the woman he loved, something that went against everything he had ever believed in. But he also knew that Zana would be free now, free to choose him without the shadow of Jallo looming over her. After their tense negotiation, Jallo left the throne room without another word. Leko watched him go, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He had won Zana's freedom, but at what cost? He couldn't shake the feeling that this entire ordeal had changed something fundamental between them. As Leko returned to his chambers, he found Zana sitting by the window, her face bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his for answers. What happened? She asked quietly, her voice trembling. Leko walked over to her, his heart heavy. Jallo and I have come to an agreement. He has agreed to let you go, to free you from your marriage, in exchange for land and a title. Zana's face paled, and she stood up, her hands clutching the edges of her cloak. You made a deal with him? You traded land for me? Leko winced at the hurt in her voice. It wasn't like that, Zana. I did what I had to do to make sure you could be free. I didn't want this to turn into a war. Not after everything we've been through. Zana shook her head, her eyes filled with emotion. I never wanted you to fight over me. I never wanted to be something that could be bargained for. Leko stepped closer, reaching out to take her hand. You weren't something to be traded, Zana. I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you. But Jallo needed something to hold on to. And this was the only way to resolve things peacefully. Zana's tears fell, but she didn't pull away. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. I don't know what to do, Leko. I feel like I've hurt both of you, and I don't know how to make it right. Leko held her tightly, his heart aching for her. You don't have to make it right, Zana. You've done nothing wrong. This is all on me and Jallo. But now you're free. You can choose whatever life you want without being tied to anyone. Zana looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. And what if I choose you? Leko's heart skipped a beat, hope blooming inside him. Then I will spend the rest of my life making you happy. The days that followed were a blur of preparations. Leko had granted Jallo the land and title they had agreed upon, and Jallo had left for the southern regions of Ajura without causing any more conflict. Lunda and Ajura remained at peace, and life seemed to settle back into a quiet routine. But for Leko and Zana, things were far from settled. Zana stayed in the palace, her heart torn between the love she felt for Leko and the guilt that still lingered from her past with Jallo. Leko tried to be patient, giving her the space she needed to heal and come to terms with everything that had happened. One evening, as they sat together in the palace gardens, Zana broke the silence that had been hanging over them for days. Leko, she began, her voice soft but steady. I've made my decision. Leko turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, he was filled with both hope and fear. Zana met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and sadness. I want to be with you, but I also need time. I've been through so much, and I don't want to rush into anything. I need to find myself again, to understand who I am outside of all of this. Leko's heart swelled with emotion, and he nodded, understanding her completely. Take all the time you need, Zana. I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes. Zana smiled softly, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you, Leko. You've always been so patient, so kind. I'm not sure I deserve it, but I'm grateful. Leko reached out and took her hand, his heart full of love for the woman sitting beside him. You deserve everything, Zana. And when you're ready, I'll be here, waiting. The months passed, and Leko focused on ruling Ajura with the wisdom and strength his father had taught him. He worked tirelessly to ensure that his people prospered, and his kingdom flourished under his reign. But no matter how busy he became, his thoughts always returned to Zana. True to her word, Zana took time to heal. She spent months traveling, rediscovering herself, and learning who she was outside of the relationships that had defined her for so long. She wrote to Leko often, sharing her experiences and her thoughts, and though they were apart, their connection only grew stronger. One day, after nearly a year of traveling, Zana returned to Ajura. She stood at the gates of the palace, her heart racing as she prepared to face Leko once again. When Leko saw her, his heart nearly stopped. She was more beautiful than ever, her eyes bright with the light of someone who had found peace within herself. Zana stepped forward, her eyes locked on Leko's. I'm ready, she said softly, her voice filled with certainty. I'm ready to be with you. Leko's heart soared, and without a word, he closed the distance between them, pulling her into his arms. They stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace. The weight of the past finally lifted, and for the first time in a long time, Leko felt whole. The woman he loved was finally his, not because of a deal or a bargain, but because she had chosen him with her heart. Their wedding was a celebration unlike any the kingdom of Ajura had ever seen. People from all corners of the land gathered to witness the union of their beloved king and his queen, and the palace was filled with joy and laughter. Leko and Zana stood together, their hands entwined, as they exchanged their vows. The love between them was undeniable, and as they looked into each other's eyes, they knew that they had found something rare and precious. After the ceremony, as the sun set over the kingdom, Leko and Zana stood on the balcony of the palace, looking out over the land they would now rule together. "I never thought we would make it here," Zana whispered, leaning into Leko's embrace. "Neither did I," Leko admitted, his voice soft. "But I'm glad we did. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else with anyone else." Zana smiled, her heart full of love for the man beside her. "We've been through so much, Leko, but I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we face it together." Leko kissed her softly, his heart brimming with happiness. "Together," he whispered, "always." And so, under the light of the setting sun, Leko and Zana began their new life as king and queen, united by a love that had survived the trials of the past and would guide them through whatever the future held. After their wedding, the kingdom of Ajura entered a golden era. Under the rule of King Leko and Queen Zana, the land prospered, and the people lived in peace. The couple's love became a symbol of hope and unity for the entire kingdom. Though Leko and Zana had faced many challenges to be together, their bond had only grown stronger through it all. But as time passed, new challenges began to emerge. One morning, as Leko and Zana sat in the royal garden, discussing matters of the kingdom, a messenger arrived, his face pale and anxious. He knelt before the king and queen, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Your Majesties, I bring troubling news from the northern regions of Ajura," he said. "There have been whispers of unrest. The people speak of a rising force, a group that seeks to challenge your rule." Leko's heart sank after everything they had fought for, after all the peace they had worked to maintain. There were still those who wished to see them fall. "Who leads this group?" Leko asked, his voice steady, though his mind raced with possibilities. The messenger hesitated for a moment before answering. "They call themselves the Sons of Korra. Their leader is said to be a powerful man named Mosi, a former general who once served under your father, King Leko." Leko's eyes widened in surprise. He had heard of Mosi, a respected warrior from the days of his father's reign. Mosi had been known for his loyalty and strength, but after Leko had taken the throne, he had disappeared, and no one had heard from him since. Why would Mosi turn against the crown? Leko asked, his brow furrowed. The messenger shook his head. "We do not know, Your Majesty, but the Sons of Korra have been gathering strength in the north, and their influence is spreading. There are rumors that they plan to march on the capital." Zana, who had been listening quietly, placed a hand on Leko's arm. "We cannot let this threat go unanswered. Leko," she said softly, "if Mosi is truly behind this, we need to understand why." Leko nodded, his mind racing with thoughts of how to handle the situation. "Send a party to the north," he instructed the messenger. "I want to know everything about this group. Their numbers, their plans, and why Mosi has chosen to rise against us." The messenger bowed and hurried off to carry out Leko's orders, leaving the king and queen to grapple with the uncertainty that now loomed over their kingdom. As the days passed, Leko and Zana grew increasingly concerned about the threat of the Sons of Korra. The reports from the northern regions were troubling. Mosi's influence was growing and more people were joining his cause. Though Leko had always ruled with fairness and compassion, it seemed that there were those who believed Mosi's promises of a different kind of leadership. One evening, as Leko and Zana sat by the fire, discussing the reports they had received, Zana spoke up, her voice filled with worry. Leko, what if this is about more than power? What if Mosi feels that he was wronged in some way? We need to know why he's doing this. Leko sighed, running a hand through his hair. I agree, but how do we reach him? Mosi has isolated himself in the north, and he refuses to meet with anyone we've sent. Zana's eyes sparkled with determination. Then perhaps we should go to him. Leko stared at her in disbelief. You mean go to the north ourselves? That's too dangerous, Zana. We don't know what Mosi is capable of. But Zana shook her head, her resolve unshaken. I know it's risky, but sometimes the best way to resolve a conflict is through direct communication. If we can speak with Mosi, if we can understand his grievances, maybe we can prevent a war. Leko hesitated, torn between the desire to protect his wife and the realization that Zana might be right. If they didn't address this issue head-on, the kingdom could be plunged into chaos. Finally, Leko nodded. We'll go to the north, but we must be cautious. I won't risk your safety. Zana smiled softly, her hand resting on Leko's. Together, we can face anything. A week later, Leko and Zana set out for the northern regions of Ajura, accompanied by a small group of trusted guards. The journey was long and treacherous, the landscape growing more rugged and wild as they traveled deeper into the territory controlled by the sons of Korra. Tensions were high, and Leko could sense the unease among his men. When they finally arrived at Mosi's stronghold, a small village nestled in the mountains, they were greeted with suspicion. The people eyed them warily, their loyalty to Mosi clear. Leko knew they were entering dangerous territory, but he remained calm, determined to see this through. They were led to a large hut where Mosi awaited them. The former general stood tall, his face lined with years of experience and hardship. His eyes were sharp, but there was something else there, bitterness. Mosi! Leko greeted him, stepping forward. It has been many years. Mosi's gaze flickered between Leko and Zana, his expression unreadable. Many years indeed, he said, his voice low. And yet, here you are, king of a land I helped defend, while I've been cast aside. Leko frowned. Cast aside? Mosi, I never meant to. Mosi cut him off, his voice rising. Don't pretend you don't know. Leko, when your father died, I was promised a place at your side, a position of honor. But you and your advisors saw me as a relic of the past, didn't you? You thought you didn't need me. Leko's heart sank as he realized the depth of Mosi's resentment. He had never intended to push Mosi away, but in the chaos of assuming the throne, he hadn't given the former general the recognition he deserved. Mosi, I understand now, Leko said carefully. I see that I made mistakes, but I never intended to dishonor you. I am here to make things right. This doesn't have to end in violence. Mosi's eyes hardened, his jaw clenched. It's too late for that, Leko. The people are tired of your rule. They want change. They want a leader who will fight for them, not one who sits comfortably on a throne. Leko's chest tightened. He knew Mosi had gained a following, but he hadn't realized just how deeply the discontent ran. He glanced at Zana, who was watching Mosi with calm determination. Mosi, Zana spoke up, her voice steady. If this is about fairness, about justice, Then let's talk. We don't want our people to suffer because of old wounds. We can find a way to work together, to bring peace to both our sides. Mosi's gaze softened for a moment as he looked at Zana. It was clear that her words had reached him, but his bitterness still held strong. You think peace is possible? Mosi asked, his voice tinged with sorrow. After all this time? Zana nodded. I do, but only if we stop this now before more lives are lost. There was a long silence as Mosi considered her words. The air was thick with tension, and Leko could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them all. Finally, Mosi lowered his head, his shoulders slumping. I have no desire to see my people die, he said quietly, but I can't just let this go. Not after everything that's happened. Leko stepped forward, his voice firm. Mosi, I am willing to make amends. Let us work together. As we once did. You can still have a place in this kingdom. A place of honor. Mosi looked up at Leko, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and sadness. And what of my followers? What of the sons of Korra? They will not be punished, Leko said. If they lay down their arms, they will be free to return to their homes, to live in peace. For a long moment, Mosi said nothing. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. Very well, I will stand down. But know this, Leko, trust is not easily rebuilt. Leko nodded in agreement. I understand, but we will rebuild it together. With Mosi's surrender, the threat of civil war was averted. Leko and Zana returned to Ajura, their hearts lighter, though they knew that the road to healing would be long. The sons of Korra laid down their arms, and Mosi was granted a position of honor within the kingdom, though the bitterness in his heart had not entirely faded. As the kingdom settled back into peace, Leko and Zana continued to rule with wisdom and compassion. They had faced many trials together, but each one had only made their bond stronger. And as they looked to the future, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, hand in hand, as king and queen. But even in peace, there were whispers of new threats on the horizon. Whispers of forces that lurked in the shadows, waiting for their moment to strike. For in a kingdom as vast as Ajura, peace could never be taken for granted.